Welcome to the Marshall McAdam Transformation Podcast, where Australian leaders in transformation drop by and have a chat to share their insights and experiences. Whatever aspect of transformation it is, we've got it covered. I'm your host, Tim Hutchinson, and I'm delighted today to be joined by Chris Gava, an accomplished CIO and transformational leader in the digital space. Chris and I are going to explore the failure or the perceived failure of transformational projects, try to explore some of the underlying reasons for failures, and more importantly, how to set up projects for success. We'll get into that right after this.
Welcome to the Marshall McAdam Transformation Podcast, where Australian business leaders and experts discuss the opportunities and challenges in delivering large-scale transformation projects. Operational, cultural, digital, technical. If it's transformation, we've got it covered. Let's get the conversation started.
Chris, absolute pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's very exciting.
You'll have to have the obligatory now virtual applause.
Very realistic. That's
there you go.
good.
It's becoming our signature in the absence of a huge audience we would normally have. Chris, thanks for coming today. We've obviously done a bit of prep and we've got a conversation ahead really around, I think, some of the success and failure of transformation projects. But before that, let's hear a little bit about you when you're not leading a transformation project.
So I feel like I'm leading projects at home half the time. So I live in Sydney with my husband and my 3 boys and my 2 pets. So my house is very loud. There's always something to be done. There's always someone to be dropped somewhere or picked up from somewhere. And if it's not written down or in a calendar, someone will be left outside a pool or outside a gymnasium or something. So we certainly are a bit of a program management exercise in itself at home. So,
do you ever forget their family and start calling them stakeholders? And
I do actually. I have been accused of holding meetings rather than family dinners where I'm discussing things. Yes, so
fantastic. Like I love it. I'm sure they love it. So career-wise, yes. I was amazed. You've done a whole heap of things. And broadly around the transformation space, but give me a sense, a sort of a snapshot of that career direction. Yeah.
So I have done quite a fair few things around transformation and technical areas, and it really started at Woolworths on the shop floor in management, and I became part of a project, and I went from being on the shop floor to working as a delivery manager, a business stakeholder delivery manager.
Yep.
And all of a sudden I was working on defects and program timing and working as the stakeholder with technical people and working with vendors. And, And I was just hooked immediately. I thought it was great.
So my understanding is, but prior to that, you'd done a law degree.
Yes. So when I was at university, I was studying law and administration. It was probably second year in probably the second lecture that I went, I don't think I'm going to actually want to do this. But I did finish the degree anyway whilst I was studying at working at Woolworths, and I was studying. So I started doing some store management at that stage. And I was offered some really great opportunities while I worked with Woolworths, lots of different program opportunities. I've worked on programs to do with infrastructure, to do with communications, to do with developing applications, digital, and I even ended up going over to live in Auckland for a couple of years with the family. So I had some really great opportunities with Woolworths. I ended up studying my MBA sponsored through them, so I had a really great time working with them.
But you've essentially gravitated towards transformation. Is that fair?
Absolutely.
Like all the best things, you've fallen into it at some point. And
transformation and digital, always.
Fell in with the wrong crowd early on and ran with
it. That's right, yeah.
And what have you seen, I have to be careful here, but you did yourself say it has been a few years in the industry.
Yes.
If I put you on the spot and said, how has transformation changed in that period of time as a soundbite, what would you say?
Well, we didn't call it transformation at first. It was just what we did.
Yeah, right.
So it's probably become something that people talk about now.
Everybody talks about it now.
Correct. Yeah. But it was either a big project or a small project.
Yeah, right.
And the big project had lots of projects in it, and the small project was just a project. So I think that was the real difference. And when you look at transformation now, and sometimes people will call something a transformation and it's just a project, and other times they'll actually be doing a transformational piece of work, and they won't be giving it the gravitas that it actually deserves, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
But then on the other hand, continuous improvement is really, really important, and I think that every organisation should also recognise that those small agile pieces of work that people deliver every week and every couple of weeks, even though that's not transformational, that's also really important, and every business should be doing those as well.
Absolutely. I mean, do you have an analogy for transformation yourself, or?
I mean, if you go back to the whole definition of transformation, it's supposed to be something that is actually a discernible change in appearance or in characteristic.
Yes.
So it really should. So if you're going to call something a transformational change, it really should have a discernible end to it, and there should be an end result that you can actually go, yes, this has happened and it's changed, which is why if it is continuous improvement, it is an ongoing, forever piece of work with the agile and drops and those sorts of things. You really need to go, this is BAU and it's a wonderful way of doing things, and this is how we live.
Yes.
But embrace that in a different way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Now, here's the next piece. When I prep for somebody to join us on the podcast, and thanks for being here again, I always say, what's the one topic that you'd like to broadly focus on? And immediately you talked about the perceptions of successful and unsuccessful transformation programs. Why that topic immediately? Because
you often work on a project, or you hear people talk about a transformation program that might be deemed as a failure or derailed or off the rails or whatever the language might be. Mm-hmm. But when you sort of peel back the layers of that, is it really? I mean, how often can it be that if you've actually agreed upfront the requirements and the details and you've come to some sort of agreement, that a project has not delivered all of those?
Yes.
That would be a real failure.
Mm.
So it's normally maybe one or two things didn't make minimal viable product and it wasn't there at first drop, or it wasn't exactly to expectation. And that's where it is. It's all about that expectation. So the question really is, did we set the expectations in the first place?
Right, understood. But it must frustrate you then, that given the world that you dedicate your time to, one of the things we see constantly is this figure of 80% of all projects fail, or 75% of all projects fail. And I think it's become, received wisdom, when in fact it simply can't be true, can it? That they don't completely fail.
And that's completely, yeah. I agree with you 100% there, that people quote things, and particularly at board level discussions, people will come out with, those sorts of quotes, or at my other board that I'm on, this failed at this organisation, how are you going to do this differently, and those sorts of things. And it comes back to the same thing, and that is, are we really agreeing on the expectations, or do we think we're agreeing on these expectations? Are we clear, or am I saying something and you're hearing something different? And that seems to be 9 times out of 10 where we end up at that whole, we deliver something and it's not quite what everyone expects. And it's almost like, somebody's ordered a 3-course meal, and they get the 3-course meal all on the one plate, all served on top of each other, and you go, well, of course that's not what they wanted.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
okay. So if I read that right, well, let's go back to that first point we touched on around BAU versus transformation, because that to me sits in the same context of, has it been communicated correctly from the start?
Yeah.
And to the relevant people. So just talk to me about when people know they're in BAU situation, when it's transformation, where that begins.
Sometimes I think people don't want to be just doing BAU or just one piece of work or continuous improvement. So it's sold to them as it's transformation, it's really important, and change is happening and those sorts of things.
It's become a sexy word, frankly. People use it constantly.
Yes. Yeah.
So, and we see it, and I sometimes feel it's slightly disingenuous.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I think it's also given to the rest of the organisation and to the stakeholders and to the wider organisation to give it a bit of urgency and to make sure that people treat it as important as the rest of their KPIs and the things that they're dealing with in their day job.
Yes,
because if it's not transformational and it's just BAU, well, then it goes to the bottom of the pile. So I have to call it transformational, so therefore they will actually give it more attention.
Yeah, that makes sense. So if we correct me if I'm wrong, but if we make the assumption that really things end up how they start off and the communication is so critical to it, perhaps break that down into two parts if it's a fair question, which is where do the stakeholders or the senior stakeholders fit in that? And then where do the delivery people fit in, the project managers, the project directors, etc.?
So I think if you really want to set things up for success, you need to, at a very senior level, your program office needs to come up with some really clear governance around how to define what is a transformational piece of work and what is just a normal project or a continuous improvement piece of work. And that needs to even be signed off at board level. This is because people will happily go, this is how you treat OPEX versus this is what you treat CAPEX, because that's got accounting standards and all of those sorts of things around it. But we don't do this for change management standards. They don't matter.
So true.
Yet they're the sorts of things that really...
Well, they do matter, but...
they really damage a culture if you don't get them right. Yet we don't give them anywhere near the same amount of attention.
So this wouldn't surprise you necessarily then, that when clients come to us for, change management resource, a lot of, no names mentioned, but a lot of clients conflate change management with comms, with project management. And on our side of the fence, when we're used to supplying the talent to certain organizations, it's really apparent that there's confusion and there's fog, even at that stage.
Yes.
You see that?
Yes, often. And the truth is, I've been very lucky to work with some great change managers over my years, and a change manager is a brilliant skill to have. And when you've had a great change manager in your organisation, A, you never let them go, and B, they're always on speed dial when you go to your next organisation, so that you can ask them things as well.
Absolutely.
So it is a skill set that you value once you've had one. It's one of those things that unless you've actually used and been in an organisation with a really good change manager, you don't understand it until you see it.
God, when you hear this, you realise how challenging these major programs are.
Yes, they're really, really challenging. And I think that's the other thing too, is people do forget that these things are going to be challenging, and you've got to be really honest with the team. There are going to be days in one of these programs that everyone's going to feel really crappy.
Absolutely, yeah.
And you're going to feel like nobody can get anything right. And they're the days when you actually have to go, hey, remember the thing we did get right, and celebrate those things, because the bad days, there's going to be a few of them, and we all have to have bad days together and good days together. So
let me guess, you wear a lot of hats when you're on form. You're part counsellor, part manager, part leader. Yeah, part clown. Part clown. Because someone's got to cheer everybody up. We'll get to that at the end. You've got 5 minute slot. Yeah. Now, talking about the leadership, I think it was interesting. One of the things you touched on was the, I think probably fairly common failure, is that too strong a word, of the C-suite? Or mistakes, or what? Yeah, talk to me about that and what effect that has. Yes, and sorry, that also includes myself at times in the fact that there are moments when you or a C-suite member will say something at a steerco or at all staff communications or something where it's an incorrect outcome that's coming out of the project. Right, okay. And that's when the project team or a stakeholder or someone who's close to the project really needs to clarify. Because if you don't, what happens is people sort of go off into this very weird spin of scope creep. Right, okay, because they don't clarify that's not quite what's going to happen here. And they almost kind of go, right, I'll take that offline and we'll have that awkward conversation later because I don't want to make that person look like they don't understand what's going on. So sorry, to clarify this, you're talking about, for example, a progress meeting where a C-suite stakeholder may have misinterpreted
Yeah. So
or misappropriated the direction.
Yeah. So, for example, an example might be, you're bringing in a new website, and there might be a comment along the lines of, and the new website will take care of shipping as well, and replace the shipping application. And the answer is no. Someone should say, no, we'll keep the shipping application.
Right. Okay.
We'll just integrate it. But instead of doing that, people go, I don't want to correct, the sponsor or the CIO or whoever it might have been.
This is
who
interesting.
says
This is sort of a hierarchical, respectful challenge, isn't it?
Correct. So people go, I don't really want to correct that person at this point in time because it might be embarrassing for them. I'll take it offline, and that never happens. So then they start doing things like they start going, well, let's talk to the vendor and see if maybe we can get the website application to actually work that way. And you kind of go, well, it's not really designed for that. And you've already got an application that does that, but they'll spend time and effort seeing if they can do that. Or then they do the dreaded phase 2. We'll put it into phase 2.
Phase 2, yeah.
Rather than having a conversation where they could have just clarified it at that point in time and then moved on.
I'm smiling because we, again, no names mentioned, but we had a client the other week who there are some challenges to what's now called phase 1. But out of the blue, they announced they were going to 2.0.
Yes.
And nobody involved knows about 2.0. But it appears to be a way of sweeping up the problems in the rearview mirror, which is now we're now 2.0 now. But they haven't sort of said we'll get that into 2.0. They've just launched it 2.0, but unilaterally from above. So we see all of this. It's fascinating. It's funny the reason I asked about sort of respect or hierarchy in those meetings is coincidentally somebody was talking about in the airline industry. There used to be there was no protocol for a co-pilot to question a captain. And then the very famous example is with a Japanese airline where there's an increased level of sort of hierarchical respect anyway, and a civil airliner flew into a mountainside with the co-pilot very aware of what the problem was and never spoke up. And then they implemented an actual mechanism where there's a two-way feedback with no respect or hierarchy needed, just a simple I'm allowed to look in the manual now and say, oh, we're flying into a mountain. So you're flying into metaphorical mountain in some ways, or creeping off course.
Yes, yeah.
And
out of politeness, yeah.
Surely you must have seen people speak up though, and it go well or badly.
and definitely in different organisations and different times, I've seen people actually speak up, and yeah, it can be awkward at the time, but people get over awkwardness pretty quickly.
Of course, yeah.
Whereas timeline creeping and expenditure creepage, people don't get over that as well. So you're much better off having an awkward meeting and having a discussion than you are actually, letting that happen and letting that occur. And the other classic one that you see is when a stakeholder changes over. So CEO leaves, or the sponsor leaves and a new person comes in, and you either just assume that they know the business case and agree with it.
Yeah, right.
Or they actually, they ask for something new, and you go, because they're new and you want to please them, you agree. And you don't actually ask for a project reset and kind of go, well, if we add this in, it will cost more, it will take us longer, or we're going to have to take something out. And those conversations, they just don't occur.
It's dangerous.
Very dangerous.
So what? So I'll put you on the spot again. What's your own approach to solving this?
It is having those conversations, and often it is, well, what can we take out? Yeah.
But how do you specifically have those conversations? I'm guessing you're very good at them.
It is about that key onboarding. So how do you get that project, especially if it's a sponsor, as within their first few weeks of being onboarded in the organisation, that project, the first few things they're going to do is they're going to meet their own team, they're going to do all of those sorts of things. The project needs to be treated as if it's their own team, not week 3 or 4 down the list. They need to be in the first couple of weeks. And it's basically highlighting that to making sure that they are absolutely treated as if they're part of their own team.
And is there a typical response you've had in the past to that, or is every case different?
Every case is different, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. With project managers or team members, what can they do to influence the success of a project?
So I think for project managers, the ones that I see that really are good at influencing outcomes and success are the ones that do keep regular touch bases with their sponsors and their stakeholders.
Yep.
And don't let them slip away. So it's very easy for, to be considerate to people's time, and people will go, oh, look, I'm busy, I don't have time, and those sorts of things. Yep. But they don't then follow up and go, well, how about, and with at least an email of these were the things I was going to touch base with, and then making sure the next week they do actually catch up.
Yeah, okay.
Because, you think that there's not much going on and there's not much to update people, but that's because you're working away and you're beavering away and doing things, but you forget your stakeholder is losing touch.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because they've got a day job and they have no idea what's going on in this project.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. What about something we see in our world? We hadn't really touched on this preparing, but what about the actual makeup of a project team? Because if you think about our role, I try not to talk about recruitment in these, but it's slightly pertinent. If you think about our role, we get requests for, XYZ resource for a project team. Yeah. Now, the truth is that 6 months, a year down the line, the feedback fairly regularly is, thankfully, hey, person A or B, C, etc., is brilliant, but they're not in the right role. So, in other words, the actual project team is not formulated appropriately.
Yeah.
How often does that happen?
I think the hardest thing with project teams is making sure that they integrate into the wider business and don't become their own subculture, which is really hard because they tend to be bolted on and they tend to deliver something and they can't deliver it to the business because the business has to feel part of it.
Yes, okay.
I'm a bit of a fan of bringing people out of business roles, putting them into a project team.
I was just about to ask you exactly that because I don't think it happens very often. And
then backfilling that role with the contract role that you were just talking about, if that sort of makes sense. Sometimes you still have to get specific skill sets in as a contract role.
Yes.
But if you sort of mix the team up and, with vendors, pre-COVID, I would have said co-location is great, but obviously,
yes, yeah,
no, people don't really co-locate that often these days anyway. But with working with third parties and vendors together was always really a good way to get a culture and a team going.
Yeah, absolutely.
But again, that subculture is really, really important. I worked with a really good learning and development manager who used to say that a project team is like a group of starlings, and starlings are birds, and that they murmurate. So when if you look it up on YouTube, they're like a flock of birds that move together. And if any one bird is out of sync,
yes,
they run into the other birds, and all the birds sort of fall out of the sky effectively.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So you really have to get a team that works together completely and utterly in sync, because if one of them's not working correctly, it's not going to work. And that includes your sponsor and your stakeholders and your people who are only in for a day or two and working in pieces.
Yes.
Because if they're not all working in sync, things don't get delivered on time, things don't work, things don't get out into the rest of the business when it's time to be delivered. It's just really important that everybody's completely in sync.
It's such a good image, and I think you may be the first and last person to use the word murmurate during a video podcast, so there we go. Thank you for that. I just wanted to ask you something else that made me think of that. You talk about moving people from the business into a project team. Again, I'm slightly off track here, but the other week we were doing some work with a client around skills management. Yeah. I don't know whether you'd agree. There's a phenomenal lack of awareness of the skills that current employees have. So organisations know what somebody's name is typically, they should do. They know what their job title is. And they kind of have an appreciation of what they're doing in that job day to day. but there's very little awareness typically of any other skills they may have or other aspirations, other areas of interest. Do you sense that? I mean...
I would agree that in all the organisations I've worked in, it's been very hard to track skills, and it's also been really hard to, across different areas of the business, label skills. So what is a skill in IT may not be the same set of skills in finance, but they're still very valuable skills that you might need in different projects and pieces of work.
How do you keep your teams motivated? You've touched on it. You're a clown sometimes, and you're.
I think the biggest thing, particularly on a large program of work, because they can go for a really long time, is celebrating the little things, because it can be a long time between sort of goalposts or sort of like reaching lines, and if you just look at the end line, then it just feels like they're never going to get there.
Yeah.
So you've got to find things to celebrate. It's also making sure that the bad days, everybody sort of also celebrates them together, because we have to feel like we've got our arms around each other as well. And I think that it's also just remembering that it's a team that does things together, because change only happens with humans.
Absolutely, yeah.
Systems don't implement themselves. You don't just buy a piece of software and put it into a business.
Absolutely.
And I think it's just recognising people and having conversations, and even in a world where you can't just walk up to someone's desk, it's just calling them and just having a chat.
And I'm wondering now if you see yourself as a buffer sometimes between the team and the leadership or stakeholders, the sponsors, or whether actually your approach is to make certain they all integrate and talk and communicate. And
I think everybody should talk to everybody. I don't think that people should need to be buffered, but if someone needs to get something done, or if it's not helpful, I'll make sure that they get buffed, if that makes sense.
They get buffed. I think that's the phrase. What advice would you have then for either aspiring transformational leaders, current transformational leaders, the ones listening or watching who've had one of those bad days today?
Always concentrate on what's gone right, not what's gone wrong.
Okay, yeah.
Because when you look at it, it's not everything that's failing. It's going to be a few things that people are particularly emotional about.
Yep.
And just remember just to have those difficult conversations as soon as you can, and just actually work with the whole team, because it does take a village to raise a child. It takes an entire organisation, the technical teams and the stakeholders to deliver a transformational project.
I think I've said this to people before, but it strikes me as it's part art, part science, part luck, part judgment, part.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a bit of everything. Yeah. So
there's lots of analogies, aren't there? It's juggling. Was it spinning plates, juggling something else, and all at the same time?
Yeah.
I was going to ask you. I will ask you in a moment what sort of next for you career-wise. But I was sort of thinking about this. Is there a dream transformation that you would like to have the opportunity to do or have done? And I don't necessarily mean, I would have liked to do, one at BP. I may be thinking bigger picture than that.
Oh, I don't know if I've ever thought of it, a dream transformation. So that one's caught me a bit unawares. So I can't think of a dream transformation, no. Next for me, I suppose, is just adding value. I really enjoy working with teams and great people. So anything to do with working with teams. So.
Have you ever, forgive me, you may have done this, but have you ever been involved in, massive government transformations?
No, I haven't actually. So I'd be really interested in any sort of government works or any of those sorts of things.
I'm not sure whether they fall into the world of dream challenges, but I'm just thinking sheer scale and controversy and challenge and
also benefit to end users. So for me, anything that delivers value is to the end user is what's important. So
I mean, I certainly again, I don't have detailed information, but some of the big sort of joined up government initiatives in the UK have actually spectacularly failed. I don't think they've part failed. I think some of the big joined up systems implementations have fundamentally failed. And I imagine to deliver something of that scale must be bloody difficult, pardon my language, but
I'm sure it would be.
But massively satisfying.
Yes, absolutely. I'm sure it would be.
I'll keep my eyes open if I come across one. If people want to get hold of you, Chris,
I just
for any reason,
reached out to me via LinkedIn, and we'll have a chat.
Fantastic. I think it just remains to say thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for the chat. This has been really interesting this afternoon.
It's fascinating just to hear somebody's everyday experiences, and I like your candid nature. That it's not all roses out there, but ultimately, I think you're an optimist, aren't you? I'm
definitely an optimist, and the truth is, it's still fun. Even a bad day is a fun day.
I love it. That's the attitude. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Cheers.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks for joining. This podcast was brought to you by McAdam, creating talent solutions in data, technology, transformation, and finance across Australia. If you enjoyed the conversation, don't forget to leave a comment, subscribe, and share. If you'd like to get in touch with the McAdam team, simply send an email, visit the website, or connect on LinkedIn. Contact details can be found in the description. See you next time.